people don't have an emotional connection to the software we make. It's just, nobody sees it because other systems are running on top of it. Now, our direct purchasing customers understand it because they're dealing with it all the time. But the rest of their company and the average person on the street has no connection at all to this software.
Hello and welcome to the Healthtech Marketing Podcast, brought to you by HealthLaunchpad and HIMSS. And thank you for joining us today. I'm Adam Chirinas. I'm HealthLaunchpad founder and CEO and your host for today. So why are we doing this thing? So marketing to healthcare is really hard and we could all use a little help. So the Healthtech Marketing Podcast is a chance for you to hear directly from leading health tech marketers. So they're going to share insights on what works in marketing to healthcare organization. So the aim of this show is to give you practical advice that we hope that you can take away today and start actually implementing in your plans and your strategies. So the pod is brought to you by HIMSS. I'm sure you all know they're the global advisor and thought leader and the leading member association that's committed to transforming the healthcare ecosystem. It's also brought to you by my company, HealthLaunchpad. We're a marketing consultancy that specializes in helping healthcare technology marketing firms grow. So today, I am delighted to introduce to you our guest, the one and only Mr. James Rose. Jim is the head of global marketing and communications for Intersystems. So I've known Jim for a little bit more than 30 years. He was actually my first boss here when I moved to America. I was about 12 at the time, I think, trying not to date myself. And so Jim and I worked together at Ogilvy & Mather on the Compaq computer account. And so here we are 30 years later. So Ogilvy & Mather is now just plain Ogilvy. They've kind of shortened things up a bit. And Compaq Computer has ceased to be. It's an ex-computer company. But thankfully, neither Jim or I are dead yet. So we're going to dive into Jim's company, the company he works for, the mighty Intersystems, in a minute. But first, Jim, tell us about you a little bit in your career story. And it's one of the things I do know about you, and not a lot of people know about you, is that you started life as a commercial pilot. So how did you get here?
Yes. So originally I was a commercial pilot flying for a corporation, flying around executives. And I took some marketing classes as an elective when I was working on my aerospace degree. And of all the classes I ever took, they made the most natural sense to me. And then President Reagan fired all the air traffic controllers, so there was no flying. So I went to graduate school and studied marketing. And then went into the ad agency business for about 13 or 14 years, including Ogilvy. And then went to the client side where I worked for IBM, Citibank, Symantec, and now Intersystems.
Great. Good. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about Intersystems. I always think about Intersystems as one of those really big, important companies that's not well understood for the layman. And I mean, in fact, my first interaction with Intersystems was I just launched my own tech company, health tech company. And I was at a regional HIMSS event in New Jersey. And in the booth, we had a little booth, and in the booth next to us was a guy from Intersystems, and he had this big it was kind of a brown logo from what I remember. It's about and I said, I'm a bit new to healthcare. Tell me, what does Intersystems do? And he explained it, and I am still to this day, I don't really remember. At the time, I didn't understand what he said, and to this day, I can't really remember the specifics of what he did. It's one of those companies which is kind of complicated, but very important. Can you explain a bit for the layman? What does Intersystems do? Well,
Intersystems' core product is really a data platform, and that has very high interoperability capabilities. So the company is about 42 years old. It is a very quiet company. One of the reasons is because the company never went public. Because my boss, the founder and CEO, said, once you go public, you have two masters. You have the shareholders and the customers, and I don't like that complication. He's very emphatic about being focused on customer success, as he puts it. if you make sure your customers are successful, then you're going to be successful automatically. So make that the top priority. So the company's been around 42 years. It has been profitable and had positive cash flow every single year. But it's been focused on quality growth, basically, rather than volume of growth. I think one of the very first electronic medical records, which is the VA's VDIF system, is based on Intersystems technology. Epic Systems runs on top of our data platform. And then also a number of large financial trading houses use our software for trading platforms as well. But yes, few people have heard of it because it's not an application in and of itself. We do have some, but mostly we sell the software that other people build the applications on top of. When the recruiter called me about this job 6 years or so ago, he said, so there's an interesting job here from one of the most successful companies that nobody's ever heard of, and they're looking for somebody to change that. To which I said, which half of that equation do you want to change?
So talk a bit about that. So as I recall, I remember sort of sitting down together over a cup of coffee at HIMSS about 5 years ago, I think 4 or 5 years ago. You had a very specific brief around creating and building the brand, which seemed to be maybe as I recall, it was like a new exercise for them. So talk about, that process.
Okay. Well, like a lot of technology companies, Intersystems sort of let its brand build naturally. And the brand wasn't actively managed. If you were to ask people attributes, I think that they would have a pretty consistent experience, pretty consistent story to tell. But we weren't. But when you let a brand build that way, then the brand is the result, and it's always kind of trailing what you do. If you just let your brand build by virtue of what you've done, the brand is always going to be behind you, whereas the brand should be ahead of you. Because a brand is really a promise that you've made and an expectation that you've set out to your customers and prospects. So we wanted to more actively manage the brand, quite frankly, to make it easier to expand into new markets and areas.
Other than not being known, I mean, what was the brand problem? What was the problem that you?
The biggest problem was people not knowing who we were.
Yeah.
So with all this heritage and record of customers from VA to Epic to a lot of large banks, every time we would go into a sales call, it was, who are you guys? What do you do? Mm-hmm. Which obviously then you burn half the sales call and they still didn't know who you were. So there's a certain efficiency there of having the brand. And also when analysts and others reach out for opinions, the better known you are as the brand, the more you're going to be in those conversations. So that's what we saw as the problem, was that the lack of a brand perception was keeping the company from expanding and keeping the company from acquiring new customers, because in their minds, you were no different than a company that started a year ago and had 2 customers. So go ahead.
So, I think for folks listening to this podcast, as I said to you a little bit earlier on, when I talk to a lot of healthcare marketing folks, I hear well, what are your objectives? I usually hear that there are 2 objectives. One is generating demand, quality prospects. And then the other one is building brand awareness. And I think most people have got, a good understanding of how to do the first thing, build demand and sort of, and developing an ABM strategy, all of that good stuff. But actually, when it comes to building brand, most people that I talk to in healthcare technology don't have that experience. So I'm just really kind of like you to get specific about the process, how you went about getting customer insight, how you translated that into positioning statements. What was the process that you went through to create the brand story?
Okay, well, first off, we always hear conversations about brand versus lead generation. I would argue that a strong brand is your most efficient and your most effective lead generation technique. Because without a strong brand, you're never going to improve the efficiency of your lead generation. It's always going to cost you the same amount of money per lead.
Yep.
Whereas with a strong brand, customers come to you. For an extreme example, does Apple need to do any lead generation?
No.
They just announce what they have. You already know a lot about it because the Apple brand is so strong. And the same holds true for any strong brand. They just have to announce a product, but they don't have to do any real lead generation.
Right. And any SDR you'll talk to will say it's just so much easier to get a meeting for a brand somebody's heard of rather than some new technology that no one's heard of.
Absolutely. So our problem was common to other software companies with whom I've worked and that you've known, Adam, in that people don't have an emotional connection to the software we make. It's just nobody sees it because other systems are running on top of it. Now, our direct purchasing customers understand it because they're dealing with it all the time. But the rest of their company and the average person on the street has no connection at all to this software. So I equate it to being like a water heater in your house. It's there, it's there, but you don't really care about your water heater. You have no emotional connection to your water heater. But you do have a really strong emotional connection to taking a hot shower in the morning on a cold day. So while people, and this is one of the first foundations of our brand strategy, is that people don't have a strong emotional connection to what we make, but people have a very strong emotional connection to the outcomes our software enables. Mm-hmm. In healthcare, that's doctors being able to make the right decisions and patients recovering and having happy lives and so on and so forth. So in building our brand, what we've done is put a lot of emphasis on the outcomes we enable and also what it is we produce in less technical terms. So one of our common themes now is healthy data. Uh-huh. In other words, you need data that's, we equate it to clean water. There's clean data and there's healthy data. So we've used the clean water metaphor. So clean data is like clean water. It's been disinfected and it's not going to kill you if you drink it. That's great. The difference between clean data and healthy data would be that if clean data is like clean water, healthy data is like clean water warmed up to 102 degrees, coming out at 30 psi in your shower head in the morning. Because again, not that I'm overemphasizing showers, but again, if you have clean water, that's great, but it's not everything you need.
Right. And
so, but what we really focus on is the end result. So we've done
how do you talk? I mean, I get it. You're creating an emotional outcome, an emotional connection to a rational thing. A rational thing is the outcome of what you do, but trying to actually do that in a way which gets to people's heart as well as brain. How do you do that? How do you tell those stories, particularly to a really hard to sell to audience?
Well, I think you answered a little bit in your question, which is it comes down to emotional connection.
Okay.
So we do a fair amount of messaging around the end result of the data. We had a TV spot where there's a man being rushed to the hospital in the back of an ambulance, and he calls ahead. The ambulance crew calls ahead with the vitals and all that kind of stuff. And the hospital is able to look up the guy's medical records because of our software, but we don't actually explicitly say that, and find out that he has a particular pre-existing condition so that the normal treatment you would give in the ambulance shouldn't be done. So they discover that, they take a different course of action. Because that information was available, this patient's going to live. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, without that information available, they would have taken the wrong course of treatment or not done anything, and the guy would have been in worse shape. So that's the net outcome. Now, we don't go into any detail about how it worked. It's just that because of our software, there's a positive outcome here. Mm-hmm. And so we find that works very well for starting the conversation. One of the other things we found where that kind of branding is particularly helpful is that the customer we deal with on a day-to-day basis in setting up software and negotiating it tends to be fairly technical. Well, within their own organization, they have to talk to non-technical audiences to get approval for what it is they want to do. We have found that the materials we create around the brand that focus on the end result helps our customers explain things to their own internal customers.
Uh-huh. So you're turning them basically into champions for you.
Exactly. We're making their job easier. We've heard back from some where they showed a video. Well, we were in a meeting and there were technical people and non-technical people, and the meeting was an hour long. At the end, we showed them some of the video that we've done, and that's when the most senior person in the room, who was non-technical, goes, "Oh, now I see what it is you're trying to do here.
Got it.
Okay, can I have a copy of that video to show the CEO?"
So interesting. Do you ever now start the meetings with those?
It depends on the complexion of the meeting.
Yeah,
but we do frequently because it gets people attention. Because there was a Volvo ad where a woman spilled coffee on herself just as a little girl was crossing the street in front of her car. Yeah, and the car slammed on the brakes automatically. So, you show that to anybody and their first reaction is, "I want one of those."
Right. Yes.
I want the car that won't let me run over a little kid.
Yeah.
So even though it can seem kind of simplistic, the emotional impact, and it has to be genuine, obviously.
Right.
I mean, these are all things that we really do, but they really matter. And they're putting it in the world, the customer's world.
The thing I always wrestle with advertising is how to make it authentic, because you get so used to seeing so much advertising. It's like, yeah, it's just an ad. Now, how do you actually make it authentic and convincing?
Well, for us, filming healthcare spots, we have a doctor go along. It so happens that in one set of spots we filmed in Southern California, we had an EMT crew inside an ambulance. Well, they were real EMT people because it's Los Angeles and everybody's an actor. And that's where it pays to do it right, because, again, we do it in LA because that's their business. So the prop guy would come out to our doctor and say, "Okay, which of these 3 defibrillators are the kind they would have in an ambulance? And what's the kind they would have in a hospital?" So that attention to detail makes it real.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I think it gives the people who are taking part in the spot, particularly if they're professionals, a level of confidence that probably improves their acting, so it feels more genuine. That's really interesting. And how do you? I loved your story about presenting the video in the business meeting, because there you're actually seeing like a real tangible result of it. How do you how do you measure the impact of what you're doing so that the company continues to be committed to doing this? Because so many companies do this for a bit and then said, "Yeah, we did that. Now we're going to move back to sending lots of email."
Well, there's really not a good objective way, but there are a lot of subjective ways. The party that was most impressed when we showed them some of the video we'd done were Gartner analysts. Huh. And as you can imagine, they're bombarded constantly. And they can't help but get jaded. Mm-hmm. But for a Gartner analyst to notice and say, "That's a good story," and you can see it had an effect on that, obviously that's one. If a customer asks to reuse it, which we shoot these in such a way that we make it available for different customers to use. Yep. Different HIEs and things like that can take our message and change the voiceover a little bit to say that they're doing things like this.
Oh, interesting. It's almost like one of those co-op spots you get in the automotive industry.
Yeah, kind of.
Huh. That's interesting.
Let me tell you, the other big impact is how well it resonates with employees. Because, so we have 17 or 1,800 people that are working away, creating all this brilliant software. And they go home to their families and they say, well, what do you do for a living, mom or dad? And they say, well, here's the code I wrote. Right. And their, kids' eyes are going to glaze over. But they can take home our video, and we've given it to people to say, this is what I do. This person in the ambulance is going to live because of the stuff I did. And the employees can connect to that. Their families can connect to it.
Yeah.
So it has had just as many benefits internally as it had externally.
It's very interesting that, my own personal experience was, my little software company where we had about, a dozen people. We would sit down with the developers and do a sort of, weekly all staff meeting. And I found that the way to get them engaged and actually sort of leaning forward in the meetings was to tell them stories like, hey, here's what we heard from one of our customers about the way that they're using the product. And suddenly it's like it made it much more meaningful for them. It's very powerful. Let me ask you, so do you do but do you do anything like brand measures or anything like that?
We do, but with the audience as specialized as ours is, and they're not super reliable because you just don't get a large enough universe to where it's something. So we take it directionally versus true measurement, because I just don't think the sample size is large enough to be able to project much from it. But what we do find is that, so like many companies, we use YouTube, and we buy YouTube advertising so video is served up. Mm-hmm. And we have these kind of TV ad, theatrical type videos, and then we have a range of different videos. What we have found is that these theatrical storytelling ones outperform every other one that gets served up. And one of the statistics you look at on YouTube is not just how often your ad is served, because that's a function of a lot of different things, how much you spent, the landing page, so on and so forth. But the other statistics I pay a lot of attention to is how many people watch the entire video.
Yes. Right.
Now, our video runs longer than what YouTube says is the ideal length. I think they say the ideal length is 20 to 22 seconds.
Yep.
Our videos run 30 to 35 seconds. And yet we always beat the average viewership of a video on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And of all the videos we serve up, it's these more theatrical ones that outperform all the others.
So that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's a great measure of, that engagement.
Well, because when a story is told well and there's an emotional element to it, you don't click away because you're engrossed. Mm. You want to see how the story ends.
Yes.
When you're just citing facts and figures, it doesn't draw you in, and you can click away from it a lot easier versus one that's a story. You want to see how the story ends. And we don't ask those videos and the brand stuff to do too much. Mm-hmm. I don't expect it to end with, I expect it to end with some curiosity and some familiarity, not a lead from every single thing.
Got it. So you're using these brand stories on YouTube. You're using them in meetings. They're all obviously all over your website. I'm sure you use them in other social media. What about page? I mean, do you use broadcast? I mean, will I see this on TV?
Sort of.
Say again?
Sort of.
Okay.
So because our audience is relatively narrow and well-defined, like healthcare professionals, financial professionals, supply chain professionals, any conventional cable or broadcast television tends to be too broad from a cost standpoint.
Right.
What we have run it in some places where we can find particular packages, if there's an event or something like that. But we've also run it on YouTube, as I mentioned, but also LinkedIn broadcast.
Oh, okay.
So LinkedIn broadcast allows you to get more specific to your audiences. So we have run on CNBC at particular times or BBC Worldwide, but mostly on LinkedIn.
So with LinkedIn, is that more sort of, kind of like taking their ABM approach? Like you give them a list of accounts, a list of titles, and said, we want to deliver this number of exposures.
Yeah, more or less. But you have to talk to somebody in my group that did the actual work on it.
Got it. Tell me about, are there other things that you've tried, over the last few years that you thought, those didn't work? And what have you learned from those?
Boy, that's a big list.
Yes. This is only a 20 or 30 minute long podcast.
I mean, if you want to cover my whole career.
Yeah, it's a podcast, not a therapy session, Jim. You can start hiring me. That was a mistake.
Well, I figured my career's gone nowhere but up since then. Then again, I hired Tom here. So, yeah, I'll tell you one thing that doesn't work is email. So we've got, look, we all know from being a consumer of it, how often we actually look at an unsolicited email. And open rates is an illusion. There are so many different tools out there to filter out unwanted email, and half of them make it look like your email was opened when it never even made it to the recipient's inbox. So do we still do email? Yeah, sure. But as far as getting new leads or communicating any kind of message, it's like a dead nerve.
Right.
So we really don't do much email at all. It's we're using more and more social marketing. And we have our people are getting more comfortable with social, and we look for relevant articles on which we can provide some insight or comment. So not just any article in healthcare, but an article that deals with interoperability, since interoperability is one of our very core strengths, or artificial intelligence in healthcare, all these areas in which we have significant experience or technology. We'll find those articles, and senior management and management will comment on it on LinkedIn. And that's a way to get not just the brand message out, but the brand message out in a more personal way. So it's an actual individual commenting on things, and you can see that individual's background and see that it's legitimate for them to comment.
That's so smart. I love that. How do you do? I'm asking how you do that, but the bit that's always really hard is to get them to actually do that. Are you?
Well, it's. I'll tell you, one of our very best social media people is a experienced, much older salesperson who's like in his late 60s, but way ahead of people half his age.
Right.
And at first we had resistance from different people throughout the organization. But one time, one of our salespeople featured a video of ours on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. She had 3 contacts in this organization that we're trying to get in. But then we could see that because of those contacts, our video got forwarded to another 20 people inside that organization that we were trying to penetrate.
Really?
Once I showed that fact, we got a lot of social media believers.
That's just fascinating. Really, really fascinating. It's remarkable actually, because it is so few companies I think use LinkedIn effectively. I mean, because I think there are so many people that have been taught how to kind of basically use it as an alternative to email, and I think that's
or they see it as just a job recruiting site.
Well, yeah, right. It's a really good thing for.
So when you speak social, a lot of people think that it's Facebook.
Yeah.
We really don't use much of, some for recruiting.
Yeah.
But LinkedIn and other social channels.
I mean, is a lot of this done through your LinkedIn page, or is it through the company page, or is it just done by the individuals?
It's done by the individuals, but we have social media manager who coordinates it all.
That's great. Cool.
And that's part of our communications department. So the communications department naturally is abreast of what articles are out there and what stories are going on that might be relevant to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so they will send out to different people, here's an article I think you should comment on. So we have a regular drumbeat of at least, 9 or 10 executives that are commenting on an article every week. And that's likewise in regions around the world.
That's actually remarkable, because it's very hard to get people to do it. And they're not doing it because they're told to, they're doing it because you've convinced them, they believed it. That's really great.
Yeah, and we made it, we try to make it easy for them.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, this is really very helpful. And as we come to a close here, Jim, I want to ask you a question which I ask everybody who comes on the pod, which is, if you could give the audience are other health tech marketers, one piece of practical advice that they can act on today, something that you've learned on in the last few years that you wish you'd known earlier. It's the bit that you wish you'd known earlier that you want to share with people. What would that be?
Okay, one thing which actually I learned way back when I went from the agency side to the client side, which is that when I went from being an ad agency guy to a client guy, working with ad agency people, the first realization that came to me was, wow, if I had this understanding of my client's business, I could have done such a much better job as an account guy.
Right.
And so likewise, I think the most important thing is looking at it from your customer's point of view and understanding what they have to go through inside their organization.
Mm.
I was talking to a lady at one of our customers a few years ago, and I said, we recognize in Intersystems that when you choose our software, you're betting your career on that decision. Because I said, and sometimes an entire company is being bet on that decision. So, you've got to have confidence in us. The expression on her face when she said, it makes me so happy, just the fact that you recognize that fact, that we as individuals have a lot riding on this decision, because she said, 3 friends of mine just got fired a week ago at a different company because they chose software that was the wrong decision and create a problem. So they were out, and that's going to limit their careers. So recognizing not just the task that your customer has in front of you, because we all focus on that, but what are the real internal pressures they have, both stated and implied. Because if somebody, particularly for important software like ours, if somebody chooses the wrong vendor, let's say they choose a core data provider, and that company goes under or the product's down, if they're not out of work, their career's probably severely limited.
Absolutely. That's fascinating. I mean, that's actually, a lot of people talk about the importance of empathy and developing personas for that, but that's not just empathy. That's just real insight into your buyer and what that decision means for them. So thank you, Jim. As expected, this has been a great conversation and really insightful. And, there's so much to unpack and take away from what you said. Anyway, so before we go, I want to thank you, Jim, for your time today. And I also want to thank everybody here for listening to the podcast. And if this is the first one of these that you're listening to, you can subscribe to this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast channels. You can also view the video interview through a link in the show notes the show notes below. And we've got some other great guests coming up, and we'll letting you know about that. So thank you again for listening. If you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, please email me at adam@healthlaunchpad.com. That's adam@healthlaunchpad.com. or you can come and find me through LinkedIn. I'm the only Adam Chirinas out there. So thank you very much again. Thank you, Jim. And thank you to all of you for listening.